Hey, family and friends, this is Marriage and Divorce Coach Dr. Angel Cartagena here with this week's edition of Tuesday Tips. As I prayed about what I would share today, I thought about the fact that I have come across a particular situation with several couples that I have been coaching on marriage. So these are people already married. They come to me, they're having issues in their marriage. And the thing that has surprised me the most is that at the core of a lot of the tensions and dissension and all the things that's happening in their marriage is they don't keep a family calendar. Now, this, so many of you may seem like duh, right? Like it's obvious that it should, but I am coming across more and more with younger couples. Um, this idea that they try to run their marriages without having a family calendar, without having one calendar where everything is on it. And the puzzlement for me is the fact that it's so easy for us to do today with all the technology that we have. In fact, my wife and I we use Google Calendar as our respective calendars, and we have those synced with our respective phones. And so we chose a color. For me, it's blue. For her, it's green. But on all the calendars, that is on our computer calendars and in our phones, you can see all of her appointments, all of my appointments. And this is really necessary, particularly when you have children. One of the things that becomes important for couples to understand is we're roped into this Western idea of marriage that's based on love and romance and all these wonderful emotions, which are good and necessary to have. However, the truth about marriage is that in many ways it's a business enterprise. You've got activity, you have a product you're trying to produce, which is happiness and contentment amongst the family. You do this by giving compassion and giving love and teaching a work ethic and all these sorts of things. But if you don't take control of your calendar, it becomes very easy for the family to sort of get away from you. And in addition to everything else, it will create all sorts of tension in the family. And so there are a few things I want you to pay attention to. That number one, you are responsible for making an intentional use of your time. I want to read this verse for you out of Ephesians chapter 5. Actually, a couple of verses, starting at verse 15. Ephesians 5:15, I'm reading out of the New International Version, the 1984 edition. It says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." And I want you to notice how Paul here ties two concepts together. The idea of knowing God's will, but that knowing God's will requires you to make the most of your time. And so you need to be intentional about how you manage your time. One example I give of this is people are concerned about raising moral children, and particularly in Christian households, raising Christian children in such an ungodly environment as we find ourselves in the United States today. A big part of how we raised our kids was the sit-down dinner. It was sacred in our house. Now understand that their mom had a schedule that did not allow her to be home many nights during the week. But that's okay. That means that it fell on me to make sure we still had it. And if I was doing sit-down dinners today, part of my procedure would be I would have a basket. Everybody, including the adults, phones off and in the basket. TV off, that was the rule we had in our house. Radio off, that was the rule in our house. This was a time for us to focus on one another and the Lord. And so the way that you teach them to say grace and to pray, the place that you do devotionals, all of that happens at the dinner table. And so that's why it needs to become a priority. No, you don't find time to do it. You make time to do it because it's a priority. Another thing that I talk to couples about in terms of intentional use of time is date night. Listen, It's all lovey-dovey and sweet and caring and all when you guys are dating and trying to connect. And then we marry one another, and it's like we forget that you need to constantly pursue love. That in order for marriage to work, you need to, it's like a plant. You just don't put it in dirt and throw a little water at it and hope that it's okay. You have to cultivate it. You have to care for it. And so it becomes important for parents to married couples to have a date night, but especially when you become parents. Why? Because it takes time to raise kids, and it takes a lot of effort to raise kids. And if you don't have time that you make to reconnect with one another, at the end, when these kids are grown, they leave the house, and all of a sudden you're left with a stranger. And this is why we have so many what they call gray divorces now in our society. And so whatever you do, be intentional about using your time. Avail yourself of tools to use your time. You don't have to use Google like we do, but just find a different way. I know some families that still do the old-fashioned calendar on the refrigerator. I'm talking the big calendar where you can see all the days of the month and stuff is written by hand in different colors. Listen, if that system works for you, great, but it's a system. All right, just as my wife and I have a system where we incorporate our computers and our smartphones, you got to do that. And then the last thing is communicate. When you're part of a team, when you're part of a family, when you are part of a group that is trying to move toward one goal, it becomes incredibly necessary for you to communicate. And what that means is that you need to make sure you talk to each other. Don't commit to stuff until you have first talked to your spouse. Make sure that the calendar is clear before you tell somebody you're going to do something. You no longer live for yourself. You now have a family. You're part of a family unit, and you must think that way. Finally, the last thing I want to say is this, is that if there's a person in the family, and I'm talking now about mom or dad, if one of you is better than the other about this kind of thing, then you be the one to do it. Okay? I remember when I became chairman of the Public Service Commission, my schedule was getting ready to be swamped. Like we were going to have to deal with cases at the agency, and there were events that the mayor was going to expect me to attend, all this kind of stuff. And so I pulled a friend of mine who was a CEO of a company. I pulled him because I know he also had a very busy schedule with a family, married, all that kind of stuff. And I asked him, I said, dude, how do you manage your calendar? And he said something to me I'll never forget because, it caused a little bit of issues in my house. He said, look, I know this is going to be difficult for your wife, but as long as you are the head of this particular organization and you have that particular schedule and all of those lives dependent on you, your executive assistant has to manage your calendar. And that means even with family stuff. In other words, when your wife wants you guys to go on vacation, she's got to go to your executive assistant and get on your calendar. Now, I know right now, I feel it. I can sense all the women getting mad at me about this one. But guess what? The system worked because I had the mayor in his office, the council that I was responsible to, the citizens of the District of Columbia. We had a huge caseload. I was starting to be asked to speak at all these conferences and all of this on top of the fact that I was married to someone who had her own full career with kids who had games and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, I was committed to be there for my kids. And so one of the pushbacks I gave to my professional life is I made it clear to everybody I will make myself available to do stuff outside of my home 2 nights a week. That's it. Outside of that, unless it's something extremely special, the rest of the nights I'm going to be home because I'm going to read stories to my kids to put them to sleep. I'm going to be the one who's praying with them before they go to sleep. And I want to be at their games. I want to help with homework. I want to do all of that kind of stuff. So intentionality, be intentional about how you manage your time, have some kind of system, communicate. And if you have someone who's better at managing a calendar than the other, let that person be the one. All things have to go through that particular person. I hope this helps. It seems again like it's common sense, but again, I'm running across more and more couples who are not doing it. And so consider having a family calendar so that you can keep track of everything that's going on and so that you can prioritize the things that are important to your family. And so if you need more help with marriage, divorce, advice, please go to drangelcartagena.com. That's my website, drangelcartagena, all one word, .com. And there's a contact tab that you can hit on and reach me, and I would be more than happy to work with you as well. And so have a fantastic week. Hey, listen, have a great 4th of July celebration for those of us who live here in the United States of America. And remember this, God loves you, and so do I.